crusty bitches and a handful of ragtags?
May the Christian Lord guide my hand against a Roman
Conscription Act. The first draft in Union history.
It's the place. No one understands what they're saying. They love to fight the cops. And the night walkers are ragtags.
Gentlemen, I leave you in the grace and favor of the Lord.
Do that, Tabadi.
Why?
Have a little show you see. Oh, indeed, sir. We run on these parts.
An entirely legal surroundings, Mr. William Cunning! Get off me, you crazy bastard! They know you haven't fought!
Yes! You!
Oopsie daisy! You bastards! I am born in this country, sir! You emigrated here! You will
Building corner 33rd Street, 2nd Avenue, set on fire by the mob. Barnum's American Museum.
Hello friends, if you are looking for a complete and cinematic recap of Gangs of New York 2002, you've come to the right place. In today's video, we'll enter the dangerous streets of 19th century New York where rival gangs fight for control of the 5 points while immigrants struggle to find a place in a city ruled by fear, loyalty and power. At the center of the story is a young man named Amsterdam Vallon, whose entire life is shaped by the death of his father and the man responsible for it, Bill the Butcher Cutting. As Amsterdam grows older, he returns to the neighborhood carrying a secret purpose that will eventually put him directly in the path of the most powerful man in 5 points. So make sure to like, share and subscribe, and let's get started. The story takes us back to 1846, when New York is a very different city from the one we know today. Lower Manhattan's 5 points is crowded, poor, and controlled by rival groups who have created their own rules. The streets are filled with immigrants arriving from Ireland and other parts of Europe, while native-born Americans fear that the newcomers are taking their jobs and changing the character of the city. This tension has created a deep division between communities, and eventually that division turns into open conflict. At the center of this conflict are two powerful gang leaders. One is Priest Vallon, an Irish Catholic leader who represents the dead rabbits and the immigrant community. The other is Bill the Butcher Cutting, a fierce nativist leader who believes that America should belong primarily to people born there. Bill is not simply another street fighter. He has built a reputation that makes people throughout 5 points fear him, and his followers are willing to fight anyone who challenges his authority. Priest Vallon knows that Bill and his followers are becoming too powerful, but he refuses to surrender the streets without a fight. The two sides eventually prepare for a major confrontation in Paradise Square. The atmosphere is tense as the members of both groups gather, knowing that the battle will determine who controls the neighborhood. Among those watching is Priest's young son Amsterdam, who is still too young to understand the full meaning of the conflict surrounding his family. Amsterdam watches as his father leads the dead rabbits into the confrontation. He sees the men around him preparing for battle, and he quickly realizes that this is not simply a disagreement between two leaders. It is a struggle over identity, territory, and the future of the people living in 5 Points. His father is fighting for the Irish immigrants who have built their lives in the city, while Bill sees the same community as a threat to his vision of America. The confrontation finally erupts and the two sides clash. In the middle of the chaos, Priest Vallon comes face to face with Bill the Butcher. Their personal rivalry has reached its breaking point, and Bill ultimately defeats Amsterdam's father. For young Amsterdam, the moment becomes the most important and painful memory of his life. He watches his father fall, and from that instant, his entire future is changed. Bill then declares victory and makes it clear that the dead rabbits have been defeated. The Irish gang is pushed out of power, and Bill establishes himself as the dominant force in 5 Points. But before Amsterdam can be taken away, he manages to escape with the memory of his father's death burned into his mind. He also takes the weapon connected to the killing and hides it, holding onto it as a reminder of the man he lost and the revenge he will one day seek. Amsterdam is eventually captured and sent away to an orphanage at Hellgate. His childhood is effectively over. Instead of growing up surrounded by his father and the community he knew, he is separated from everything familiar. Years pass, and the young boy who witnessed his father's death grows into a young man carrying a single purpose. He has not forgotten Bill Cutting, and he has not forgotten what happened in 5 Points. 16 years later, Amsterdam returns to New York. The city has changed, but 5 Points still carries the scars of the old gang wars. Amsterdam is no longer the frightened child who watched his father die. He is older, stronger, and determined to find a way to get close to Bill. But he quickly realizes that simply confronting Bill would be impossible. The Butcher has built an entire network of loyal followers and political connections around himself. Amsterdam reconnects with his old friend Johnny Sirocco, who helps him understand how much 5 Points has changed. Johnny introduces Amsterdam to the world that now surrounds Bill, including the people who work for him and the individuals who benefit from his influence. Amsterdam also learns that several people who were once loyal to his father are now living under Bill's control. This makes his mission even more complicated because the man he wants to destroy is deeply connected to the neighborhood. Amsterdam realizes that revenge will require patience. If he attacks Bill too soon, he will almost certainly lose. Instead, he decides to move carefully through Bill's organization and earn his trust. He knows that the closer he gets to the Butcher, the more dangerous his position becomes. One mistake could expose his identity and destroy any chance of completing the revenge he has carried since childhood. During this time, Amsterdam also encounters Jenny Everdeen, a clever and independent woman who survives through deception, theft, and confidence. Jenny is already familiar with the dangerous world of 5 Points, and Amsterdam quickly realizes that she is far more complicated than she first appears. Their relationship adds another layer to Amsterdam's already difficult journey, especially because Jenny has connections to Bill's world that Amsterdam does not fully understand. As Amsterdam begins finding his place in 5 Points, he slowly moves closer to Bill. The Butcher notices the young man's courage and intelligence, and instead of immediately treating him as a threat, he begins taking an interest in him. Amsterdam understands that this is exactly the opportunity he has been waiting for. If he can become valuable to Bill, he may eventually get close enough to destroy the man who killed his father. But there is a dangerous problem. Bill does not know who Amsterdam really is. He sees only a talented young man who might become useful to his organization. Amsterdam, meanwhile, is standing beside the very person he has hated for 16 years. Every moment near Bill forces him to hide his true feelings and remember why he returned. Amsterdam has finally entered the butcher's inner circle. But the closer he gets to Bill, the more complicated his plan becomes. Because in 5 points, trust can be more dangerous than hatred, and Amsterdam is about to discover that revenge may cost him far more than he ever expected. Amsterdam Vallon has returned to 5 points after 16 years, but the neighborhood he remembers from childhood is almost unrecognizable. The streets are still crowded, violent, and controlled by powerful men. Yet, Bill the butcher cutting now stands at the center of everything. His influence reaches far beyond the gangs themselves, and people who once opposed him have either disappeared, surrendered, or learned to survive by staying close to his power. Amsterdam understands that confronting Bill directly would be foolish, so he decides to remain patient and slowly build a position inside the butcher's organization. Johnny Sirocco becomes Amsterdam's guide to this dangerous world. Through Johnny, Amsterdam learns how Bill operates and how carefully he chooses the people allowed near him. Bill is not simply a man who wins fights. He understands fear, loyalty, politics, and public reputation. He knows that controlling 5 points requires more than having the strongest fighters in the streets. He needs people who will obey him, politicians who will protect him, and ordinary citizens who believe that challenging him is pointless. Amsterdam begins making himself useful to Bill. He participates in the activities of the gang and gradually earns the butcher's attention. Bill notices that the young man has courage and intelligence, and he enjoys watching Amsterdam handle dangerous situations without showing too much fear. Amsterdam knows that every moment is an opportunity, but he also understands the danger. He is standing beside the man who murdered his father, and if Bill ever discovers his true identity, Amsterdam's revenge will end before it begins. During this period, Amsterdam becomes increasingly involved with Jenny Everdeen. Jenny is a skilled thief and survivor who knows how to move through 5 points without becoming trapped by anyone's control. She is intelligent, confident, and familiar with Bill's world, making her both an attraction and a complication for Amsterdam. Their connection grows, but Jenny can sense that Amsterdam is hiding something. She knows that a person who suddenly appears in 5 points and becomes interested in Bill's organization must have a reason. Amsterdam eventually learns more about Jenny's relationship with Bill. The discovery creates tension between them because Amsterdam realizes that Bill has already influenced her life in ways he does not fully understand. At the same time, Jenny knows that Amsterdam is becoming dangerously close to the man who controls the neighborhood. She warns him that Bill is not someone who can simply be manipulated and discarded when the time comes. Despite the warning, Amsterdam continues with his plan. His hatred for Bill remains stronger than his fear. Every time he looks at the butcher, he remembers the battle in Paradise Square and his father's final moments. Those memories have guided him for most of his life, and now he finally has the opportunity to stand close to the person responsible. But Amsterdam also discovers that Bill's personality is more complicated than he expected. Bill is violent and ruthless. but he also has a strange code of loyalty. He respects people who stand by their word, and he sometimes shows a sense of honor toward those he considers worthy. This makes Amsterdam's plan more difficult because Bill begins treating him almost like a protege. The butcher sees something of himself in the young man, unaware that Amsterdam's real purpose is to destroy him. As Amsterdam becomes more trusted, he gains access to information that could eventually help him challenge Bill. He learns about the butcher's alliances with powerful political figures and discovers how deeply Bill's influence extends through New York. Bill's relationship with politician William Tweed is especially important because it allows the butcher to operate with greater confidence. Amsterdam realizes that defeating Bill will require more than a private act of revenge. Bill's power is connected to a much larger political system. Meanwhile, the city itself is becoming increasingly unstable. New York is filled with tensions surrounding immigration, elections, and the Civil War. Irish immigrants continue arriving in large numbers, while native-born groups remain hostile toward them. Politicians use these divisions to gain support, and men like Bill understand how to turn public fear into personal power. Amsterdam sees an opportunity in this chaos. If he can weaken Bill's political influence and separate him from the people protecting him, the butcher may finally become vulnerable. But before Amsterdam can put his plan into action, Bill begins testing his loyalty. He wants to know whether the young man is truly committed to his cause or secretly working against him. Amsterdam manages to hide his real intentions, but the pressure becomes greater. Every conversation with Bill becomes a dangerous game. One wrong word could reveal the truth, and one emotional reaction could expose the hatred Amsterdam has carried for years. He must constantly remind himself that revenge will only be possible if he remains patient. Johnny, however, becomes increasingly uncomfortable with Amsterdam's growing closeness to Bill. Johnny wants Amsterdam to remember why he came back, but he also fears that Amsterdam is becoming too deeply involved in the butcher's world. Their friendship begins facing pressure as both men realize that revenge has consequences that could affect everyone around them. At the same time, Jenny becomes an even more important part of Amsterdam's life. She challenges his obsession with revenge and makes him think about the possibility of having a future beyond the violence of 5 points. Amsterdam begins to realize that he has spent so many years preparing to destroy Bill that he has barely considered what he will do afterward. But Bill is becoming increasingly interested in Amsterdam, and that attention is dangerous. The butcher believes he has found a young man who could become one of his most trusted allies. Amsterdam knows the truth is completely different. He is standing inside Bill's world for one reason: to eventually bring it down. And as Amsterdam moves closer to the moment when he will reveal his true intentions, the tension between loyalty, love, and revenge becomes impossible to ignore. Amsterdam continues working his way deeper into Bill the Butcher's organization, carefully hiding the real reason he returned to 5 points. Bill has begun trusting him more, impressed by the young man's courage and ability to handle himself in dangerous situations. For Amsterdam, this growing trust is exactly what he needs, because every step closer to Bill brings him closer to the revenge he has imagined since childhood. But the longer he stays beside Bill, the harder it becomes to separate his personal hatred from the complicated world he has entered. Bill takes Amsterdam under his wing and begins treating him almost like a younger version of himself. He tells Amsterdam stories about the old days, and speaks proudly about the battle that gave him control of 5 points. Amsterdam listens carefully, pretending to admire the man while secretly remembering that Bill was the person who killed his father. Every word Bill speaks reminds him of the past, yet Amsterdam knows he cannot reveal what he is feeling. If Bill discovers the truth too early, Amsterdam will lose everything. Amsterdam also becomes increasingly involved in the political side of 5 points. He learns that Bill's influence extends beyond street violence. The butcher has connections with politicians and powerful figures who understand that his gang can influence elections and control neighborhoods. Amsterdam begins realizing that Bill's real strength is not simply the men who fight for him. It is the network of fear, money, loyalty, and political influence that surrounds him. William Tweed, a powerful political figure, is also trying to strengthen his position in the city. Tweed understands that the Irish immigrant population is becoming an important political force and he sees an opportunity to gain their support. Bill, however, wants to maintain control over the neighborhood and does not trust anyone who might weaken his influence. This creates tension between political ambition and gang power, giving Amsterdam an opportunity to watch the two sides begin moving against each other. While Amsterdam becomes more deeply involved with Bill, his relationship with Jenny Everdeen also develops. Jenny sees through much of Amsterdam's behavior and realizes that he is carrying a dangerous secret. She knows that Bill is capable of destroying anyone who betrays him, and she becomes worried that Amsterdam's desire for revenge will eventually put both of them in danger. Amsterdam tries to convince her that he knows what he is doing, but Jenny understands that emotions can make even the smartest plan collapse. Johnny Sirocco also remains close to Amsterdam, but their friendship begins changing. Johnny has his own feelings for Jenny, and Amsterdam's growing relationship with her creates jealousy and tension between the two friends. Johnny wants Amsterdam to remember that they are supposed to be working together, but Amsterdam is becoming increasingly focused on his personal mission. The pressure of revenge is beginning to affect the people closest to him. Amsterdam's opportunity finally arrives when Bill publicly demonstrates how much he trusts him. Instead of remaining just another member of the gang, Amsterdam is given a more important position within Bill's circle. This gives him access to information and places he could never have reached on his own. He understands that the time for revenge may be getting closer, but he also knows that one careless move could destroy the entire plan. At the same time, Bill continues celebrating his victory over the dead rabbits and makes it clear that he considers the old gang permanently defeated. The dead rabbits have been outlawed, and their name carries little power in the streets anymore. But Amsterdam begins quietly rebuilding the spirit of his father's followers. He knows that many Irish immigrants still remember Priest Vallon and the resistance he represented. Amsterdam begins speaking with men who remember his father and the old dead rabbits. He does not immediately reveal his identity to everyone, but he slowly reminds them of the cause they once fought for. The idea of resistance begins spreading again, and Amsterdam realizes that he may have the ability to challenge Bill with more than a single knife or gun. If he can unite enough people, he can create a force capable of standing against the butcher. Bill senses that something is changing in the neighborhood, although he does not yet understand exactly what it is. He has spent years controlling 5 points by keeping his enemies divided and frightened. The possibility of the old resistance returning threatens everything he has built. Amsterdam understands that this is the first real weakness he has discovered in Bill's position. Meanwhile, political tensions continue growing throughout New York. The city is divided over immigration, elections, and the ongoing civil war. Irish immigrants are increasingly being drawn into political struggles, and powerful men are trying to use their anger for their own advantage. Amsterdam sees that the city is moving toward a much larger conflict, and he realizes that the violence of 5 points may soon become part of something far greater. Then Amsterdam makes a decision that changes everything. Instead of simply waiting for the perfect moment to kill Bill, he decides to publicly challenge the butcher's authority. He knows that Bill's power depends on people believing that nobody can stand against him. If Amsterdam can break that fear, others may finally have the courage to resist. But challenging Bill openly is extremely dangerous. The butcher has spent years building his reputation, and he will not allow anyone to destroy it without a fight. Amsterdam knows that once he takes this step, there will be no easy way back. For the first time since returning to 5 points, Amsterdam is no longer simply hiding inside Bill's organization. He is preparing to stand against it. And soon, the secret he has protected for so long will begin coming dangerously close to the surface. Amsterdam's decision to challenge Bill the Butcher begins changing the balance of power in 5 points. For years, Bill has ruled the neighborhood through fear, violence, and the belief that nobody is strong enough to stand against him. But Amsterdam is slowly bringing back the spirit of resistance that once existed under his father, Priest Vallon. The more people begin listening to Amsterdam, the more dangerous his position becomes. He knows that Bill will eventually notice what is happening, but Amsterdam is no longer willing to spend his entire life hiding. As Amsterdam moves between the different groups in 5 points, he begins finding people who still remember the dead rabbits. Many of them have spent years living under Bill's control, believing that Priest Vallon's defeat marked the permanent end of their resistance. Amsterdam reminds them that their former leader did not surrender. He fought until the end, and his death created a memory that Bill could never completely erase. Amsterdam does not reveal everything about himself immediately, but his words begin giving these men a reason to believe that the old spirit of 5 points can return. Bill, meanwhile, continues enjoying his position as the most feared man in the neighborhood. He has no idea that Amsterdam is quietly working against him. He sees Amsterdam as someone who has earned his place through loyalty and courage, and that makes the eventual betrayal even more dangerous. Bill begins trusting Amsterdam with more responsibilities, giving him access to important conversations and allowing him to move freely among the people closest to the butcher. Amsterdam uses every opportunity to observe Bill carefully. He studies the way Bill commands his men, the way he handles political relationships, and the way he responds whenever someone questions his authority. Amsterdam realizes that Bill's greatest weakness is his pride. The butcher cannot tolerate humiliation, and he cannot allow anyone to make him look weak in front of his followers. Amsterdam begins thinking about how that weakness can eventually be used against him. Jenny becomes increasingly concerned about Amsterdam's plan. She knows that his desire for revenge has been growing for years, but she also understands that Bill is much more dangerous than Amsterdam realizes. She has seen what happens to people who cross the butcher, and she does not want Amsterdam to throw away the future he could have. Their relationship becomes more complicated because Jenny knows Amsterdam is keeping secrets, while Amsterdam knows that revealing the truth could put her in even greater danger. Johnny also becomes caught between his friendship with Amsterdam and his feelings for Jenny. He has always considered Amsterdam a close friend, but jealousy begins affecting his judgment. He watches the two of them growing closer and becomes frustrated by the fact that Amsterdam seems to have forgotten their original purpose. Johnny wants to be loyal, yet he also wants Jenny for himself, creating a tension that will eventually have serious consequences. Meanwhile, William Tweed continues working to build political influence among the Irish immigrant population. Tweed understands that the growing immigrant community could become a powerful voting force, and he wants to use that power to strengthen his political organization. Amsterdam recognizes that Tweed's ambitions could weaken Bill because political influence may eventually become more important than the butcher's control over the streets. Bill does not trust Tweed's intentions. He believes that politicians are temporary allies who will eventually turn against him when they no longer need his support. This disagreement creates a growing divide between the two men. Amsterdam watches carefully, realizing that Bill's political connections are not as stable as they appear. If those alliances collapse, the butcher could become much more vulnerable. Amsterdam begins taking greater risks. He knows that simply waiting for Bill to make a mistake will not be enough. He needs to create a moment when the people of 5 Points can see that Bill is not untouchable. That opportunity finally arrives when Amsterdam publicly challenges the butcher's authority and refuses to back down. The confrontation shocks the people watching because nobody has openly questioned Bill's power in years. Bill is furious, but instead of immediately killing Amsterdam, he becomes interested in the challenge. He sees the young man's defiance as something unusual and almost admirable. Bill has always respected courage, even when it comes from an enemy. He believes Amsterdam may have the potential to become a powerful man himself, unaware that the young fighter's courage is driven by a secret hatred. The tension between them grows with every encounter. Amsterdam continues pretending that he respects Bill while secretly preparing for the moment when he can finally strike. Bill, meanwhile, becomes more curious about Amsterdam's past. Small details begin appearing that do not completely fit the story Amsterdam has told him. Then Bill begins asking questions. Amsterdam realizes that his greatest danger is no longer simply being caught plotting against Bill. The butcher may be starting to suspect that the young man standing beside him has a connection to the past he thought he had buried forever. Amsterdam knows that if Bill discovers who he really is, there will be no second chance. The secret identity he has protected for 16 years is beginning to crack, and the moment Bill discovers that Priest Vallon's son has returned to 5 Points, the struggle between them will become deeply personal once again. Amsterdam realizes that the secret surrounding his identity is becoming increasingly dangerous. For years, he has imagined the moment when Bill the Butcher finally discovers that Priest Vallon's son has returned to 5 Points. But now that the possibility is becoming real, Amsterdam understands how much he has to lose. His carefully built position inside Bill's organization could disappear in an instant. He has spent months earning the butcher's trust, studying his habits, understanding his weaknesses, and rebuilding the loyalty of men who once followed his father. Now everything depends on whether Amsterdam can continue hiding the truth long enough to make his move. Bill's curiosity about Amsterdam's past continues growing. The butcher is not a man who easily trusts anyone, and he has survived for years by recognizing danger before it reaches him. He begins asking Amsterdam questions about where he came from, who raised him, and what brought him back to 5 Points. Amsterdam answers carefully, making sure that his words do not reveal the connection to Priest Vallon. Every conversation becomes a dangerous game in which one wrong answer could expose the revenge plan that has been years in the making. At the same time, Amsterdam's growing influence among the Irish community begins attracting attention. Men who once feared Bill are starting to believe that resistance may be possible again. Amsterdam does not simply want to kill the butcher in secret anymore. He wants to destroy the fear that has allowed Bill to rule 5 Points for so long. If Bill dies but his followers remain powerful, another man could simply take his place. Amsterdam therefore begins thinking about something much bigger than personal revenge. William Tweed also sees an opportunity in the changing situation. He wants to increase his political influence among the Irish immigrants, and he understands that Bill's control over 5 Points could become an obstacle. Tweed begins supporting policies and candidates that could weaken the butcher's influence. Amsterdam watches these political movements carefully, realizing that Bill's enemies are becoming more numerous. The butcher may still appear powerful, but the foundations of his authority are beginning to crack. Bill responds to these changes with suspicion and anger. He does not like the idea of politicians trying to control the people he considers part of his territory. His relationship with Tweed becomes increasingly tense, and Amsterdam realizes that the conflict between them could eventually create the opening he needs. But he also knows that politics is dangerous because powerful men often use people and abandon them when circumstances change. While all of this is happening, Amsterdam's relationship with Jenny becomes more complicated. Jenny understands that Amsterdam's obsession with revenge is consuming him, and she tries to make him see that there could be another life waiting for him. She does not want him to spend every moment thinking about the man who killed his father. Amsterdam cares about Jenny, but his past continues pulling him back. He has carried the memory of Priest Valent's death for so long that letting go of revenge feels almost impossible. Jenny also knows more about Bill's world than Amsterdam realizes. She has spent years surviving around the dangerous man and understands how quickly alliances can change. She warns Amsterdam that Bill is not simply a violent gangster. He is intelligent, unpredictable, and capable of turning even his closest relationships into weapons. Amsterdam listens to her, but he believes that the only way to end Bill's control is to confront him eventually. Johnny, meanwhile, becomes increasingly jealous of Amsterdam and Jenny. His feelings begin interfering with his loyalty, and he starts making choices that could place Amsterdam's plan in danger. Amsterdam does not realize how serious Johnny's resentment has become. He still thinks of Johnny as a trusted friend who helped him return to 5 Points, but the tension between them is slowly becoming impossible to ignore. Then Amsterdam decides that the time has come to take a more direct step against Bill. Instead of remaining hidden, he begins openly supporting the return of the dead rabbits. The old symbol carries enormous emotional weight among the Irish immigrants because it represents the resistance that existed before Bill's victory. Amsterdam knows that using his father's legacy will eventually reveal who he is, but he believes the risk is necessary. Bill soon hears rumors that the dead rabbits may be returning. The news immediately angers him. For years, Bill has treated the dead rabbits as a defeated enemy, something from the past that should never be allowed to rise again. Their return would not simply challenge his authority, it would reopen the wound of the battle that made him king of 5 Points. Bill begins searching for whoever is behind the movement, determined to crush it before it becomes strong. Amsterdam watches from the shadows as Bill reacts exactly as he expected. The butcher becomes obsessed with finding the person responsible. His anger grows and his attention turns toward the people around him. Then one moment changes everything. Amsterdam is finally exposed. Bill discovers that the young man he has trusted is actually Amsterdam Vallon, the son of the priest he killed 16 years earlier. The realization hits him with a mixture of shock, anger, and fascination. Suddenly, all of Amsterdam's actions make sense. His return to 5 Points was never about joining Bill's organization. He came back to avenge his father. Bill feels betrayed, but he also seems impressed by the courage it took for Amsterdam to remain so close to him for so long. He realizes that the boy he thought was becoming one of his followers has actually been waiting for the perfect moment to destroy him. Amsterdam knows the secret is finally out. There is no more hiding, no more pretending to be Bill's ally, no more waiting for the perfect opportunity. The two men are now openly enemies, and the entire 5 Points is about to learn that Priest Vallon's son has returned. But Bill is not willing to let Amsterdam walk away. The butcher prepares to make an example of him, and Amsterdam is about to discover just how dangerous it is to challenge the man who has ruled 5 Points for 16 years. Amsterdam's secret is finally exposed, and the careful plan he has spent years building collapses in a single moment. Bill, the butcher cutting, now knows exactly who the young man standing in front of him really is. He is not simply another ambitious fighter trying to rise through the ranks of 5 Points. He is Amsterdam Vallon, the son of Priest Vallon, the man Bill killed 16 years earlier in the battle that gave him control of the neighborhood. For Bill, the discovery is both a betrayal and a reminder of the past he believed he had buried. For Amsterdam, there is no longer any reason to hide. The man he has hated since childhood finally knows the truth, and the two are now standing on opposite sides of an old blood feud. Bill's reaction is immediate and brutal. He does not simply see Amsterdam as another enemy. He sees him as the living continuation of Priest Vallon's legacy, a reminder that the dead rabbits were never completely destroyed. Amsterdam has spent years imagining his revenge, but he quickly discovers that confronting Bill is far more difficult than dreaming about it. Bill has an entire organization behind him, while Amsterdam is surrounded by enemies who have every reason to kill him. The butcher wants everyone in 5 Points to understand what happens when someone challenges his authority. Amsterdam is captured and brought before Bill's followers. The young man refuses to beg for his life even though he knows that he has little chance of escaping. Bill studies him carefully, almost fascinated by the courage of the man who managed to deceive him for so long. Instead of immediately killing Amsterdam, Bill chooses to humiliate him. He wants to destroy the symbol of Priest Vallon's return before the people of 5 Points can rally behind it. The message is clear. Bill still controls the neighborhood, and Amsterdam's father's name cannot protect him. Amsterdam's punishment leaves him badly injured and humiliated. The experience is devastating because it reminds him that he is still facing the same powerful enemy who destroyed his family years earlier. But the pain also reveals something important. Amsterdam realizes that his revenge cannot depend on his own strength alone. Bill's power comes from the fear surrounding him, and Amsterdam will never defeat him by simply becoming another violent fighter. If he wants to challenge the butcher, he must give the people of 5 Points a reason to stand together. Jenny becomes deeply concerned when she learns what has happened to Amsterdam. She knows that Bill's anger will not end with one punishment, and she understands that Amsterdam is now in greater danger than ever. She refuses to accept that his story is over. Along with the people who still believe in Amsterdam's cause, she helps him escape from the situation and gives him a chance to recover. Amsterdam is eventually taken away from the immediate danger, but his physical injuries are not the only problem. He has lost the advantage of secrecy, and the entire neighborhood now knows that Priest Vallon's son has returned. Some people see him as a symbol of hope, while others are afraid to support him because Bill remains powerful. Amsterdam understands that simply being alive is not enough. He needs to turn his personal revenge into a movement capable of challenging Bill's control. As Amsterdam recovers, he begins reconnecting with the men who once followed his father. The old dead rabbits may have been officially defeated, but their memory still exists among the Irish community. Amsterdam uses that memory to bring people together. He tells them that Bill's victory did not erase everything Priest Vallon stood for. The fight for the neighborhood, the dignity of the immigrants, and the right to resist oppression are still alive. Bill, meanwhile, becomes increasingly determined to crush the dead rabbits before they can reorganize. He understands that Amsterdam's survival could inspire other people to challenge him. The butcher therefore begins searching for anyone who supports the young Vallon. He uses threats and violence to remind the neighborhood that loyalty to Amsterdam will come at a price. Many people are frightened, but others begin realizing that Bill's reaction itself is proof that Amsterdam has become a genuine threat. The political situation also becomes more important. William Tweed continues building his political organization and sees the Irish immigrant population as a major source of support. Bill's control over 5 Points has always allowed him to influence elections, but Tweed wants to replace street power with political power. The rivalry between the two men grows stronger, and Amsterdam realizes that Bill's enemies may become useful allies. Amsterdam understands that he cannot fight Bill alone. He needs political support, street fighters, and ordinary citizens who are willing to stop living in fear. His father's old followers provide the beginning of that resistance, while Tweed's political ambitions provide another possible source of strength. Amsterdam therefore begins working toward a larger confrontation that will involve far more than two men settling an old score. Jenny also becomes an important part of Amsterdam's recovery. She encourages him to think beyond revenge and reminds him that his life cannot be defined entirely by Bill. Amsterdam cares deeply for her, but he knows that his past still has a powerful hold over him. Every time he thinks about walking away, he remembers his father's death and the years he spent preparing for this moment. He cannot simply forget what Bill did. At the same time, Johnny's jealousy continues creating problems. He has never been comfortable with Amsterdam and Jenny becoming close, and his resentment grows stronger after Amsterdam's return. Johnny believes Amsterdam has taken away the life he wanted, and his emotions begin pushing him toward decisions that could damage their friendship. Amsterdam is too focused on the coming conflict to fully recognize how dangerous Johnny's feelings have become. The streets of 5 Points gradually become divided again. On one side stands Bill and the powerful gang network he has built. On the other side, Amsterdam begins gathering people who believe that the butcher's rule must finally come to an end. The old conflict between the dead rabbits and Bill's forces is returning. But this time the situation is larger because the entire city is changing around them. Amsterdam knows that Bill will eventually come for him. Instead of waiting, he begins preparing for the confrontation. He understands that Bill's greatest weapon is fear, So Amsterdam starts challenging that fear wherever he can. Every person who refuses to obey Bill weakens his authority. Every man who joins Amsterdam makes the Butchers' organization slightly less powerful. Slowly, the idea of resistance begins spreading through 5 points. Bill senses the change. The butcher has spent 16 years convincing everyone that he is untouchable, but now the son of the man he killed is standing against him. Bill becomes increasingly obsessed with proving that Amsterdam cannot replace Priest Vallon. He wants to destroy Amsterdam publicly, not simply because of revenge, but because Amsterdam represents the possibility that Bill's entire reign can be challenged. Amsterdam knows that this will eventually lead to another major confrontation. But he is no longer the frightened boy who watched his father die. He has survived Bill's punishment, rebuilt his strength, and gathered people around him. The battle is no longer just Amsterdam against Bill. It is becoming a battle over who will control the future of 5 points. And as the city moves closer to a major political and social crisis, Amsterdam prepares to turn the anger of an entire neighborhood against a man who has ruled it for 16 years. Amsterdam is no longer hiding from Bill the Butcher, and the struggle between them has begun spreading through every corner of 5 points. After surviving Bill's brutal punishment, Amsterdam understands that simply waiting for another opportunity will not be enough. Bill knows who he is now, and the butcher will be watching every move he makes. Yet, Amsterdam also knows something has changed. The people of 5 points have seen him survive, and the story of Priest Vallon's son returning to challenge Bill is beginning to spread. For the first time in 16 years, Bill's enemies have a reason to believe that his rule can actually be challenged. Amsterdam begins rebuilding the resistance with greater determination. He reaches out to men who remember the dead rabbits and reminds them of the role his father once played in protecting the Irish community. These men have lived under Bill's rule for years, and many are afraid to openly oppose him. Amsterdam understands their fear because he has seen Bill's violence himself. Instead of demanding that everyone immediately join him, he slowly convinces them that Bill's power is not as permanent as they once believed. Every person who is willing to stand up becomes another crack in the foundation of the butcher's control. Bill responds by increasing his pressure on the neighborhood. He wants everyone to understand that Amsterdam's return will not change anything. His men patrol the streets, intimidate potential supporters, and remind people that Bill still has the strongest organization in 5 points. The butcher believes fear will be enough to stop the rebellion before it becomes serious. But his reaction has an unexpected effect. The harder he tries to silence Amsterdam, the more people begin wondering why he is so afraid of one young man. Amsterdam also realizes that he needs help beyond the streets. William Tweed's political organization is becoming increasingly powerful, especially among the Irish immigrant population. Tweed sees an opportunity to weaken Bill by encouraging Irish voters to support his political machine. Amsterdam understands that political power and street power can work together, even though he does not completely trust Tweed. He knows that Tweed has his own ambitions, but at this moment their interests overlap. Both men want to reduce Bill's influence over 5 points. Bill is furious when he realizes that politics may be slipping away from him. For years, he has been able to influence elections through intimidation and control, but the city is changing. Immigrants are becoming a larger part of New York's population, and politicians can no longer ignore them. Bill sees these changes as a threat to the world he understands. Amsterdam sees them as an opportunity to finally destroy the system that allowed Bill to dominate 5 points for so long. While Amsterdam works to strengthen the resistance, Jenny continues trying to keep him grounded. She understands that revenge has been the center of his life for years, but she can see that the coming conflict may destroy him if he allows hatred to consume him completely. Amsterdam cares about Jenny, yet he still struggles to imagine a future where Bill is not part of his life. The butcher killed his father, destroyed his childhood, and shaped the man he became. Amsterdam feels that defeating Bill is something he owes to his father's memory. Jenny reminds him that Priest Vallon would not want his son to become exactly like the man he hates. Amsterdam does not immediately accept the lesson, but her words stay with him. He begins understanding that there is a difference between fighting for his father's legacy and becoming trapped inside his father's revenge. Amsterdam wants to end Bill's rule, but he also wants to make sure that 5 Points has a future after the violence finally stops. The relationship between Amsterdam and Johnny, however, becomes more dangerous. Johnny's jealousy has grown into resentment, and he begins feeling that Amsterdam has taken everything from him. He is frustrated by Amsterdam's relationship with Jenny and by the fact that Amsterdam has become the center of the resistance. Johnny once helped Amsterdam return to 5 Points, but now he feels pushed aside. His anger creates a weakness that Bill may eventually be able to exploit. As Amsterdam's movement grows, Bill begins looking for ways to divide his enemies. He knows that a united opposition could become dangerous, so he searches for disagreements and personal conflicts that he can use against them. Bill understands human weakness extremely well. He knows that people who fight together for a cause can still turn against each other when jealousy, fear, or personal ambition becomes stronger than their loyalty. The political campaign becomes increasingly intense, and Amsterdam finds himself caught between two worlds. On one side are the street fighters who want to challenge Bill directly. On the other are politicians who want to gain control through elections and influence. Amsterdam realizes that neither side can succeed alone. The butcher's strength comes from the combination of violence and political connections, so defeating him will require breaking both forms of power. Bill continues acting as if nothing can threaten him. He moves through 5 Points with the confidence of a man who has ruled for years, surrounded by followers who still fear him. But underneath that confidence, his obsession with Amsterdam is growing. The young man's survival has become a personal insult. Bill believed that Priest Vallon's bloodline ended when he killed the priest, and now Amsterdam's return feels like the past coming back to punish him. Amsterdam eventually decides that the resistance must make a public statement. He wants the people of 5 Points to see that the dead rabbits are no longer simply a memory. Their return will force Bill to react, and Amsterdam hopes that his reaction will reveal the weakness behind his reputation. The old symbols of the neighborhood begin appearing again, and the streets become filled with rumors about an approaching confrontation. Bill hears the rumors and understands exactly what they mean. The dead rabbits are returning. Amsterdam Vallon is leading them. And the man Bill thought he destroyed 16 years ago has become the symbol of a rebellion that could finally take 5 Points away from him. The tension reaches a breaking point as both sides prepare for what seems inevitable. Amsterdam knows that the next confrontation will not be a small street fight. Bill will bring everything he has, while Amsterdam supporters will be fighting for more than revenge. they will be fighting for the right to determine the future of their neighborhood. But just as Amsterdam believes his plan is finally coming together, the city around them begins moving toward an even greater crisis. The Civil War is creating anger and fear across New York. Political tensions are reaching their limit, and ordinary people are becoming caught between forces far larger than themselves. Amsterdam realizes that the final struggle against Bill may soon take place in the middle of chaos, unlike anything 5 Points has ever witnessed. And when that chaos arrives, there may be no way for either man to walk away unchanged. The situation in New York is becoming more unstable, and Amsterdam's struggle against Bill the Butcher is now connected to a much larger conflict. The city is divided by politics, immigration, and the growing pressure of the Civil War. In 5 Points, people are already living with violence every day, but the tension outside the neighborhood is beginning to make everything even more dangerous. Amsterdam understands that the final confrontation with Bill may no longer happen under controlled circumstances. If the city erupts into chaos, both sides could be forced into a battle that neither of them can completely control. Amsterdam continues gathering support for the return of the dead rabbits. His father's name has become a symbol of resistance, and more people are beginning to believe that Bill's rule can finally be challenged. But Amsterdam also knows that Bill has not lost his ability to intimidate people. Many residents still fear the butcher, and some are unwilling to risk their lives simply for revenge. Amsterdam therefore tries to convince them that this is no longer only about Priest Vallon or his son. It is about whether 5 Points will continue living under the control of one man. Bill, meanwhile, becomes increasingly determined to destroy Amsterdam's movement. He understands that Amsterdam's greatest weapon is not his fighting ability, but the hope he has created among people who once believed resistance was impossible. Bill has spent years making himself appear unbeatable, and Amsterdam's survival threatens that reputation. Every time Amsterdam appears in public, the butcher's authority becomes slightly weaker. Bill therefore prepares to make his response as powerful and frightening as possible. The political situation gives both men another reason to act quickly. William Tweed is working to strengthen his political organization and gain the support of immigrant communities. His ambitions put him directly against the system of influence that Bill has built. Bill understands that if Tweed succeeds, the political protection surrounding 5 Points could disappear. Amsterdam also recognizes the importance of the election, because weakening Bill politically could make it easier to challenge him on the streets. As the election approaches, 5 Points becomes a place of constant tension. Political supporters move through the neighborhood while gangs continue watching one another. Amsterdam's allies want to use the changing political situation to weaken Bill, while Bill wants to prove that political power still belongs to the men who control the streets. The conflict between them becomes increasingly difficult to separate from the larger struggle taking place across New York. Jenny remains close to Amsterdam, but she can see that the final stage of his revenge is approaching. She worries that once the fighting begins, Amsterdam may become so consumed by the conflict that he will forget everything they could have together afterward. Amsterdam does not dismiss her concerns, but he still feels that he cannot walk away. He has spent too many years carrying the memory of his father to simply leave Bill in power. At the same time, Johnny's resentment reaches a dangerous point. He feels that Amsterdam has taken Jenny away from him and has become the leader he wishes he could be. His jealousy makes him vulnerable to manipulation, and Bill understands that personal emotions can sometimes be more useful than weapons. The butcher knows that Amsterdam's greatest weakness may not be Amsterdam himself, but the people around him. Amsterdam's growing movement also forces Bill to make a choice. He could try to quietly eliminate Amsterdam and hope the rebellion disappears, but Bill knows that Amsterdam has already become too important as a symbol. Killing him secretly could turn him into a martyr. Instead, Bill wants to confront him in a way that demonstrates his own strength and reminds everyone in 5 Points who is still in control. The rivalry between the two men, therefore, becomes more than a personal feud. Bill represents the old order of 5 Points, built through violence, fear, and loyalty to powerful gang leaders. Amsterdam represents a new generation that wants to break away from that system. Their conflict reflects the changing city around them, where immigrant communities are becoming stronger and political power is slowly beginning to replace the influence of street gangs. Then the situation takes an even darker turn as the Civil War draft creates outrage among the people of New York. Many poor men feel that they are being forced to fight a war while wealthier citizens can avoid service by paying money. Anger spreads through the city and protests begin turning into violent unrest. The streets that were already divided by race, class, and politics now become even more dangerous. Amsterdam realizes that the city is approaching an explosion. Bill sees the same thing, but each man sees the coming chaos differently. For Amsterdam, the unrest creates a chance to finally break Bill's control. If the city's political structure collapses under pressure, the butcher may lose the protection that has allowed him to dominate 5 Points for so long. For Bill, however, the chaos is another opportunity to prove that only strong men can survive when society begins falling apart. The violence eventually reaches 5 Points, and the neighborhood becomes caught in the middle of the city's turmoil. Buildings, streets, and homes are threatened as anger spreads beyond the original political dispute. Ordinary people are forced to choose whether to hide, flee, or fight. Amsterdam's followers prepare themselves, knowing that the long-awaited confrontation with Bill may now happen under completely unpredictable conditions. Amsterdam searches for his allies and realizes that everyone around him is being pulled into the conflict. He wants to protect Jenny and the people who supported him, but there is no longer any safe place to hide. Bill's forces are also preparing, and the butcher appears ready to settle the old feud once and for all. Amsterdam finally accepts that the moment he has been waiting for is here. He has spent years preparing to face the man who killed his father. He has survived betrayal, humiliation, and violence. He has rebuilt the dead rabbits and challenged Bill's authority. And now, the entire city is moving toward the same confrontation. As Amsterdam prepares to face the butcher, the streets of New York descend further into chaos. The political conflict, the civil war, and the gang war are beginning to collide, creating the perfect storm for the final struggle. Bill has spent 16 years believing that he owns 5 Points. Amsterdam has spent 16 years believing that one day he would take that power away from him. Now, there is nowhere left to run. The old feud is about to reach its final chapter. The streets of New York have finally reached the point where the old order can no longer hold itself together. The anger created by the Civil War draft has spread across the city, and what began as political frustration has turned into widespread violence. Buildings are attacked, people run through the streets searching for safety, and the authorities struggle to regain control. 5 Points, already one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the city, is now surrounded by chaos. For Amsterdam Vallon, this moment represents both an opportunity and a terrible danger. He has spent years preparing to confront Bill the Butcher, but he never imagined that their final struggle would take place while the entire city was burning around them. Amsterdam gathers the men who have chosen to stand with him and prepares them for what is coming. The dead rabbits are no longer simply a memory from his father's generation. They have returned as a symbol of resistance, and Amsterdam knows that everyone who joins him understands what they are risking. Bill's men are also preparing, and the butcher has no intention of surrendering his control. The two sides have been moving toward this confrontation since Amsterdam first returned to 5 points, and now the growing unrest has created the perfect setting for their final clash. Bill watches the destruction spreading through New York with a mixture of anger and confidence. He has survived years of gang warfare and believes that chaos only proves his philosophy about power. In his mind, civilized society is nothing more than a thin layer covering the violence underneath. When that layer disappears, men like him become even more important. Bill believes that Amsterdam cannot possibly defeat him because Amsterdam's resistance is built on emotion, while Bill's power is built on experience and fear. Amsterdam, however, has changed since the beginning of his journey. He is still carrying the pain of losing his father, but he is no longer fighting simply because he wants revenge. He has seen what Bill's rule has done to 5 points, and he understands that defeating the butcher is also about ending a system that has kept people afraid for years. His father's legacy has become larger than his own personal anger. Amsterdam now fights for the people who have chosen to stand beside him. As the fighting spreads, Amsterdam's allies begin moving through 5 points. The old neighborhood becomes a battlefield, with rival groups confronting one another, while the larger riots continue around them. Every street seems dangerous, and nobody knows exactly where the next attack will come from. Amsterdam understands that the chaos makes it difficult to control the situation, but he also knows that Bill is facing the same uncertainty. Jenny remains in danger as the violence grows. Amsterdam wants to make sure she is protected, but she refuses to simply stand aside while everything around them collapses. Jenny has survived 5 points by relying on her intelligence and courage, and she understands that the people she cares about are fighting for their lives. Her presence reminds Amsterdam that there is something beyond revenge worth protecting. Meanwhile, Johnny's earlier betrayal has created consequences that Amsterdam cannot ignore. The trust between the two former friends has been destroyed, and the growing violence leaves little room for forgiveness. Amsterdam realizes that revenge and jealousy have already damaged more relationships than he expected. He understands that the battle against Bill has forced everyone around him to make choices, and not everyone has chosen the path he hoped they would. The fighting intensifies as Bill's men move against Amsterdam supporters. The butcher wants to destroy the dead rabbits completely before they can become a permanent force in 5 points. Amsterdam's followers fight back with everything they have, refusing to surrender despite being surrounded by a much larger and more experienced enemy. The streets become filled with the sounds of fighting, and the old rivalry between the two sides reaches its most violent stage. Amsterdam finally realizes that there is no more time for strategy. Bill is coming for him. The two men have spent years moving toward this moment, and neither one is willing to walk away. Amsterdam begins searching for Bill through the chaos, carrying the weapon and memory associated with his father. Every step reminds him of the first battle in Paradise Square, when he was only a child watching Priest Vallon face the man who would become his greatest enemy. Back then, Amsterdam was powerless. Now he is walking toward Bill as a grown man who has spent his entire life preparing for this confrontation. Bill also begins searching for Amsterdam. The butcher knows that their final meeting cannot be avoided. He wants the confrontation to happen on his terms, just as it did when he defeated Priest Vallon. Bill still sees himself as the stronger warrior, and he believes that killing Amsterdam will finally erase the Vallon name from 5 Points. But Amsterdam is no longer fighting alone. The people around him have given his cause strength, and the dead rabbits have returned to the streets. Bill can defeat individuals, but he cannot easily destroy an idea once people have begun believing in it. Amsterdam understands this, and that knowledge gives him confidence as he moves toward the final confrontation. The chaos of the city becomes even more intense. Fires spread through parts of New York, civilians flee through the streets, and soldiers attempt to restore order. The world outside 5 Points seems to be collapsing. Yet, for Amsterdam and Bill, everything has narrowed down to one personal battle. The political crisis, the riots, and the gang war all become background to the confrontation that has been waiting 16 years to happen. Finally, Amsterdam finds Bill. The two men face each other amid the destruction surrounding them. There are no more secrets between them. Bill knows exactly who Amsterdam is, and Amsterdam no longer needs to pretend that he respects the man who killed his father. Bill looks at Amsterdam and sees Priest Vallon's son. Amsterdam looks at Bill and sees the man who destroyed his childhood. For a brief moment, everything else seems to disappear. Then they attack. The fight is brutal and deeply personal. Bill relies on the strength and experience that made him feared throughout 5 Points, while Amsterdam fights with the determination of a man who has spent his entire life preparing for this exact moment. Every movement carries the weight of 16 years of anger, loss, and preparation. But Amsterdam soon realizes that defeating Bill will require more than anger. He must remain focused. He must remember everything he has learned. And most importantly, he must refuse to let Bill turn him into another version of himself. The final confrontation has begun, but its outcome is still uncertain. Around them, New York continues burning. The dead rabbits are fighting. Bill's empire is beginning to collapse. And two men who have been connected by hatred since 1846 are finally fighting to determine which one will survive. The long-awaited confrontation between Amsterdam Vallon and Bill the Butcher Cutting has finally begun, and everything surrounding them seems to disappear as the two men face each other in the middle of a city consumed by violence. For Amsterdam, this moment carries the weight of 16 years of memories. He can still remember being a frightened child watching his father, Priest Vallon, enter the battle against Bill in Paradise Square. He remembers the fear in the streets, the sound of the fighting, and the moment his father was defeated. All those memories have followed him throughout his life, and now he is standing face to face with the man responsible for them. Bill looks at Amsterdam with the confidence of someone who believes that history is about to repeat itself. He remembers defeating Priest Vallon and believes that the son will suffer the same fate as the father. But Amsterdam is no longer the helpless child Bill saw years ago. He has survived poverty, violence, betrayal, and years of preparation. More importantly, he has learned that his greatest advantage is not his anger. It is his ability to keep fighting even when fear and pain tell him to stop. The battle between them becomes extremely personal. Bill attacks with the experience of a man who has spent his entire life fighting, while Amsterdam moves with the determination of someone who has been waiting for this exact moment. Every strike seems to carry a memory from the past. Amsterdam is not simply trying to defeat a powerful gang leader, he is confronting the person who destroyed his family and shaped the course of his entire life. Around them, the chaos of New York continues. The draft riots have turned the city into a dangerous battlefield, with fires spreading through neighborhoods and people desperately trying to escape the violence. Soldiers are attempting to restore order while civilians are caught in the middle. Yet, for Amsterdam and Bill, none of that matters. Their attention is fixed entirely on each other. Amsterdam fights with everything he has, but Bill's experience gives him a dangerous advantage. The butcher has spent decades learning how to survive fights, and he understands exactly how to use Amsterdam's emotions against him. Bill constantly reminds Amsterdam of his father, attempting to make him angry and reckless. He wants Amsterdam to fight emotionally because he knows that anger can make even a strong fighter careless. For a moment, Amsterdam nearly falls into the trap. The memories of Priest Vallon's death come rushing back, and his desire for revenge becomes overwhelming. He wants Bill to suffer for everything he has done. But Amsterdam remembers how far he has come since returning to 5 points. He understands that if he allows hatred to completely control him, then Bill has already won in another way. Amsterdam steadies himself and continues the fight. Bill becomes increasingly frustrated. He expected Amsterdam to fight like an angry young man driven by revenge, but instead he finds a determined opponent who refuses to surrender to emotion. The butcher's confidence begins turning into rage. He attacks harder, determined to prove that the Vallon family can never defeat him. Amsterdam refuses to back down. The battle becomes more exhausting with every passing moment. Both men suffer injuries, but neither is willing to stop. Amsterdam knows that he may never receive another opportunity like this. If Bill survives, the butcher will continue ruling 5 points, and everything Amsterdam has fought for could disappear. Bill also understands what is at stake. He has spent 16 years building his reputation, and Amsterdam's survival threatens the story he has told everyone about himself. Bill's entire identity is connected to his victory over Priest Vallon. If Amsterdam defeats him, then the battle that made Bill powerful will no longer represent an unstoppable victory. It will become the beginning of his downfall. The struggle continues while the city around them falls further into chaos. The sound of gunfire and fighting fills the streets, but Amsterdam remains focused. He remembers the people who believed in him, the men who returned to the dead rabbits, and Jenny, who has repeatedly tried to keep him from losing himself to revenge. Those memories give him another reason to keep fighting. Bill notices the change in Amsterdam. The young man is no longer fighting only for his father. He is fighting for everyone who believed that 5 points could have a future without the butcher. Bill refuses to accept that idea. He attacks Amsterdam with renewed fury, forcing him backward. For a moment, it looks as though the butcher may once again prove that experience and brutality are stronger than hope. Amsterdam struggles to remain standing, but he refuses to surrender. Then Amsterdam finds another opening. He remembers the lessons he has learned from his life in 5 points. He understands that Bill's strength comes from his ability to intimidate people and make them believe he cannot be defeated. Amsterdam realizes that the butcher is strongest when his enemies are afraid of him. The moment people stop believing in Bill's invincibility, his power begins disappearing. Amsterdam pushes himself forward again. Bill is surprised by their renewed determination. The two men continue fighting until both are exhausted. Their weapons become less important than their will to continue. This is no longer a battle where either man can simply walk away. One of them must finally fall. Meanwhile, the political war surrounding 5 Points is changing. Bill's connections and influence are being weakened by the larger crisis in New York. The political system he once depended upon is no longer as stable as it was. The city is changing rapidly, and the old style of gang control is beginning to lose its power. Amsterdam understands that the butcher's world is collapsing around him. Bill understands it too, but even with everything falling apart, he refuses to surrender. He tells Amsterdam that men like them are born to fight, suggesting that violence is the only language they truly understand. Amsterdam hears the words, but no longer believes them. He has spent too much time around people who showed him kindness to accept that violence is the only possible future. The fight reaches its most dangerous moment when Amsterdam finally manages to gain the advantage. Bill is weakened, but he is still dangerous. Amsterdam has the opportunity to finish the battle, yet for a brief moment he hesitates. He remembers Jenny's warning and the lessons he learned about becoming consumed by revenge. Bill sees the hesitation and attempts to use it against him, but Amsterdam is ready. He understands that mercy and weakness are not the same thing, and that defeating Bill does not mean becoming Bill. The final exchange begins. Amsterdam attacks with everything remaining in him, while Bill refuses to retreat. Their struggle becomes a physical representation of the old and new 5 Points. One man is fighting to preserve a world built on fear, while the other is fighting to end it. Then Amsterdam finally gets the opportunity he has waited 16 years to find. Bill falls. The butcher's reign is finally coming to an end. Amsterdam stands over the man who destroyed his childhood, but the victory does not feel exactly the way he imagined. There is no celebration inside him. Instead, he feels the weight of everything that has happened. His father is still gone. His childhood cannot return. The years he spent living with hatred cannot simply disappear. Yet, Bill is no longer standing over 5 Points. The man who once seemed untouchable has finally been defeated. Amsterdam looks at him and understands that the revenge he carried for so long has reached its conclusion. But the story of 5 Points is not finished. The city is still in chaos. The people Amsterdam fought for still need protection, and the future of the neighborhood must now be decided without the man who controlled it for 16 years. Bill the Butcher has finally been defeated, but Amsterdam's victory does not bring an immediate end to the chaos surrounding 5 Points. The streets of New York are still caught in the violence of the draft riots, and the destruction has spread far beyond the neighborhood where Amsterdam's personal battle began. As smoke rises over the city and people struggle to survive, Amsterdam stands in the middle of a world that has changed forever. For 16 years, Bill's presence shaped everything in 5 Points, and now that he is gone, Amsterdam must face the strange reality of living in a place without the man he spent his entire life preparing to defeat. The defeat of Bill also changes the meaning of the Dead Rabbits. For years, the name represented a lost cause, a group that had been crushed when Priest Vallon was killed. Amsterdam brought the name back because he believed it could inspire people to resist Bill. But now the symbol has become something larger. The dead rabbits represent the return of a community's pride and the end of one man's domination. Amsterdam looks around the streets and realizes that his father's legacy has finally been restored, but he also understands that no victory can bring Priest Vallon back. The people who supported Amsterdam begin dealing with the aftermath of the fighting. Some have lost friends, homes, and family members, while others are simply trying to survive the destruction around them. The victory over Bill has come at a terrible cost. Amsterdam knows that revenge could never undo all the suffering that occurred in 5 points, but at least the man responsible for much of that suffering is no longer in control. Jenny remains one of the people Amsterdam thinks about most. Throughout his journey, she has repeatedly tried to show him that his life could become something more than revenge. Now, with Bill gone, Amsterdam finally has to consider what that future might look like. The hatred that controlled him for so many years has reached its end, leaving him with a strange emptiness. He has spent so long imagining the moment when Bill would fall that he never truly planned for what would happen afterward. Amsterdam also understands that his father would not want him to remain trapped in the past. Priest Vallon fought because he believed his people deserved a place in the city, not because he wanted his son to spend his entire life seeking revenge. Amsterdam now begins seeing his father's legacy differently. The greatest tribute he can give Priest is not another act of violence. It is building a life in which the sacrifices of the past actually mean something. The political world is changing as well. William Tweed's influence continues growing, and the Irish immigrant population is becoming increasingly important in New York politics. The old balance between gangs and politicians is beginning to shift. Bill's death has removed one of the strongest street powers in 5 points, creating space for political organizations to take greater control of the city's future. Amsterdam watches these changes carefully. He knows that removing Bill does not automatically solve the problems that created 5 points violence. Poverty, discrimination, political corruption, and conflict between communities still exist. But without Bill standing at the center of the neighborhood, people have the opportunity to create something different. The memory of Johnny also weighs on Amsterdam. Their friendship had begun with loyalty and shared experiences, but jealousy and betrayal eventually tore them apart. Amsterdam realizes that the violent world around them affected everyone differently. Some people found strength in resistance, while others became consumed by resentment. He cannot change the choices Johnny made, but he can choose what kind of person he wants to become from this point forward. The destruction caused by the riots makes it impossible to pretend that 5 points has simply returned to normal. Entire parts of the city have been damaged, and the people who live there are forced to rebuild their lives. Amsterdam understands that the real challenge is no longer defeating an enemy, it is surviving the consequences of everything that has happened and making sure that the same cycle of violence does not simply begin again under a different leader. Jenny and Amsterdam finally have a chance to think about their relationship without Bill constantly standing between them. Yet, Amsterdam knows that their future will always carry the scars of the past. He cannot erase the years of pain, but he can stop allowing those years to control every decision he makes. For the first time, he begins looking forward instead of backward. The story then begins moving away from the immediate violence and toward the future of New York. Years pass and the city continues changing. The 5 points that Amsterdam knew slowly disappears as New York expands and modernizes. Buildings rise, streets change, and the old neighborhood gradually becomes part of a much larger city. But Amsterdam never completely forgets where he came from. The memory of his father remains with him. The memory of Bill remains as well. Yet those memories no longer control his life in the same way. As the years pass, the story of the men who fought in 5 points becomes part of the city's history. The people who once believed the neighborhood would remain trapped in violence eventually see a different New York emerging around them. The old gangs lose their influence, political organizations become more powerful, and the city moves toward a future that none of the original fighters could have imagined. Amsterdam eventually visits the place where his father and Bill are buried. Standing before their graves, he sees how much time has passed. The two men who once seemed larger than life are now simply names connected to a forgotten period of New York's history. Their conflict shaped Amsterdam's childhood, but it no longer defines the entire city. He looks at his father's grave and remembers the man Priest Vallon was before the violence took him away. Amsterdam understands that his father was not simply a warrior, he was a leader who believed that his community deserved dignity and a future. Then Amsterdam looks toward Bill's grave. The butcher once believed that his name would dominate 5 points forever, but time has proven otherwise. His power disappeared, his gang disappeared, his world disappeared, and the city continued moving forward. Amsterdam realizes that this is the true end of the battle. Bill did not simply lose a fight, the world he represented eventually disappeared around him. The 5 points of Amsterdam's childhood is becoming a memory, and as New York grows into a modern city, the story of Priest Vallon, Bill the Butcher, Amsterdam, Jenny, and the Dead Rabbits becomes part of the forgotten history buried beneath the streets. But Amsterdam's journey is finally coming to an end. He has survived the violence that shaped his entire life. He has faced the man who destroyed his family. He has carried his father's memory through years of darkness, and now at last he can begin living for the future instead of fighting for the past. Years have passed since the bloody struggle that once consumed 5 points, and New York has continued changing in ways that none of the people from Amsterdam Vallon's childhood could have imagined. The streets that were once controlled by rival gangs are slowly becoming part of a growing modern city. Buildings rise higher, neighborhoods expand, and the old world of gang leaders, street battles, and territorial wars begins disappearing into history. For Amsterdam, however, the memories never completely disappear. He has spent his entire life carrying the weight of his father's death, the hatred he developed for Bill the Butcher, and the responsibility of keeping Priest Vallon's memory alive. Amsterdam's journey began when he was only a child, standing helplessly in the middle of a battle that changed everything. His father, Priest Vallon, was a respected leader who believed that the Irish immigrants of 5 points deserved to defend their community and their place in New York. When Bill Cutting defeated Priest and took control of the neighborhood, Amsterdam lost not only his father but also his childhood. He was sent away carrying memories that would eventually shape every decision he made. 16 years later, Amsterdam returned to 5 points as a completely different person. He was no longer the frightened boy who watched his father die. He returned as a young man with a single purpose: to get close to Bill and avenge the death that had haunted him for most of his life. What began as a secret mission slowly became something much larger. Amsterdam discovered that Bill's control over 5 points was built on fear, politics, loyalty, and violence, and he realized that defeating Bill would require more than a single act of revenge. By entering Bill's inner circle, Amsterdam learned how the butcher maintained his power. He saw the friendships, alliances, and political connections that protected Bill from his enemies. He also discovered that Bill was not simply a mindless killer. The butcher possessed his own twisted sense of loyalty and respect, which made Amsterdam's position even more complicated. Bill began trusting him, unaware that the young man standing beside him was actually the son of the man he had killed. That deception eventually ended. When Bill discovered Amsterdam's true identity, the relationship between them changed completely. Amsterdam was no longer pretending to be an ally, and Bill was no longer treating him as a promising young follower. The old blood feud between Priest Vallon and Bill had returned through their sons and through the memory of the dead rabbits. Amsterdam was punished brutally, but instead of destroying his determination, the experience convinced him that his fight had to become bigger than himself. He rebuilt the dead rabbits and inspired people who had spent years living under Bill's control. The old symbol returned to the streets, and with it came the possibility of resistance. Amsterdam realized that the most important thing Bill had taken from 5 points was not simply territory. He had taken away people's belief that they could stand together. By bringing them together again, Amsterdam began weakening the foundation of Bill's power. At the same time, New York itself was changing. Political movements were becoming stronger, immigrant communities were gaining influence, and the Civil War was creating enormous tension throughout the city. William Tweed recognized the political importance of the Irish population and worked to build support among them. Bill's old methods of controlling 5 points through fear were increasingly challenged by a new kind of power. Then the draft riots exploded. The city descended into chaos, and the violence surrounding 5 points became even more dangerous. Fires spread, people were attacked, and the streets became a battlefield. Amsterdam and Bill were no longer simply fighting over one neighborhood. Their personal conflict became part of a citywide collapse in which old political and social tensions finally erupted. Amid that chaos, Amsterdam and Bill finally faced each other. Their final confrontation carried the weight of everything that had happened since 1846. Amsterdam was fighting for his father, for the dead rabbits, and for the people who had placed their faith in him. Bill was fighting to protect the world he had built and the reputation that had made him the most feared man in 5 points. The battle was not simply about who was stronger. It was about whether the old world, represented by Bill, could survive. Amsterdam finally defeated Bill, ending the butcher's control over 5 points. But victory did not erase the pain of the past. Amsterdam could not bring his father back, could not restore the childhood he lost, and could not undo all the suffering caused by years of violence. His revenge had finally been achieved, yet he discovered that revenge alone could never repair everything that had been broken. That realization becomes one of the most important parts of Amsterdam's journey. He had spent years believing that killing Bill would give him peace. Instead, he discovered that peace would come from finally letting go of the hatred that had controlled him. Bill had shaped his life by turning Amsterdam into a man who lived for revenge. By defeating Bill and refusing to become another version of him, Amsterdam finally broke that cycle. Jenny also represents the possibility of a future beyond violence. Throughout the story, she understands that Amsterdam is more than the revenge he carries. She sees the person he could become if he stopped allowing the past to control him. Their relationship survives the violence and uncertainty surrounding them, giving Amsterdam a reason to look toward the future rather than constantly looking back. The political and social changes in New York continue long after Bill's death. The city grows, modernizes, and eventually transforms the very neighborhood where Amsterdam's story began. The 5 points of the 19th century slowly disappears and the old streets become part of a much larger New York. Amsterdam watches this transformation from a distance, understanding that even the most powerful men eventually become memories. Bill once believed his name would dominate 5 points forever. It did not. His gang disappeared. His influence disappeared. His world disappeared. But the memory of the people who fought for their communities survived in the history of the city. Amsterdam eventually stands before the graves of Priest Vallon and Bill Cutting. Looking at them after so many years, he sees the past differently. His father and his greatest enemy are now both part of history. Their lives were completely different, yet their conflict shaped the same neighborhood and changed Amsterdam forever. At his father's grave, Amsterdam remembers the man who gave him the courage to fight. He understands that Priest Vallon's true legacy was never simply violence. It was the belief that people should stand together and protect their community. Amsterdam carried that lesson through the darkest period of his life. Then he looks toward Bill's grave. The man who once appeared unstoppable has become only a name beneath the earth. Amsterdam finally understands something that he could not understand as a child. No empire built on fear lasts forever. People change, cities change, power changes hands, and eventually, even the strongest men become memories. The final images of the story show New York continuing to grow while the old 5 points slowly disappears. The modern city rises over the streets where Amsterdam, Priest Vallon, Bill, and the Dead Rabbits once fought. The world moves forward, leaving the violence of the past behind. Amsterdam's story therefore ends not with another battle, but with the possibility of peace. He has faced his father's killer. He has survived the world that created him. He has restored the name of the Dead Rabbits. And most importantly, he has finally escaped the hatred that once controlled his entire life. The past will always be part of him, but it no longer has to determine his future. Gangs of New York ultimately becomes a story about revenge, identity, power, immigration, loyalty, and the transformation of a city. Amsterdam's journey shows how one man's personal search for revenge can become part of a much larger struggle for change. Bill the Butcher may have ruled 5 points through fear, but time proved that no man can control history forever. And as the old neighborhood disappears beneath the growing city of New York, the memories of those who fought there remain buried beneath the streets, a reminder of a violent era that helped shape the city that would eventually rise above it. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing movie breakdowns. See you in the next video.